Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
And hello, I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading The Ringed Castle by Dorothy Dunnett. We're going to cover chapters 4, 5, and 6. Dee will lead our discussion, but before we dive in, thoughts on these chapters?
So this may be an unpopular opinion, and I know it's going to get better, but except for the first chapter, I found this section to be somewhat dull and tedious. It's a lot of exposition. It's a lot of setting up stuff for the rest of the book, which is fine, but I had some problems focusing on chapters 5 and 6. But there's still some great stuff that happened, and we can go through it.
Yeah, I had a fun moment in chapter 6, which we'll talk about when we get there, that has nothing to do with the book and only has something to do with the master's degree I got years ago. So we will discuss that when we get there. But yeah, I agree with Philippe. It was a lot of exposition, and there's a couple of sort of power moments that I think are interesting that we can talk about when we get there. I think we're setting up some dynamics that I think are going to play out, hopefully in interesting ways. I did enjoy chapter 4. So
Yeah. I was right. Margaret Lennox is back in kind of a major way, unfortunately. And yeah.
I was going to say she's also creeping around in chapter 6, being all ominous and in the subtext,
Yes. Reading about her was, the more enjoyable part, I think, of those chapters. It's just a strange sort of slowing down of the plot, because the last 2 books have been like really action packed and full of character development, and I'm sure we're going to get there, but I know that Dunnett is setting up her time letting us know what's happening in this book. So
yeah, although I will say I really enjoy the scenes that are just like character back and forth, that where not a lot happens but there's conversations. So I enjoy those chapters. But there still was a lot of exposition. So
I do as well. It's just when that happens in this book, it's usually with characters we don't really know much about yet. So it's harder to sort of follow them for me.
Right. Like, who's this Dickon guy and why do we care about him?
Chancellor Dickon.
Yeah.
The Don, the Spanish guy at the end of chapter 6.
Right. Yeah, what's happening there?
Jane, what's her name?
Dormer.
Jane Dormer, that's right. I was going to say Jane Seymour. I was like, I know that's not correct.
She's dead at this point.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay, so let's look at chapter 4 and then we'll get to sort of 5 and 6 when we get there. This is great. It's chapter 4, in which Philippa writes a letter and discovers I think the most delightful thing in this chapter for me is that she discovers Francis's library, which is such a way to get a sense of a person, and you get this idea that as she goes through Francis's library, she's actually learning him. Like, she's learning Latin and she's learning Greek and she's learning all these things, but she's also learning Francis in ways.
And she's like learning the things that formed him.
Yes.
And now they're helping to form her too.
Right. So I love this idea of her education growing through like this skeleton in the bones of his education, which is cool. So.
Well, and she's also getting more insight into who he is in this cold tower room that he was relegated to before his father died.
I know, and you're like, he's like the poor child exiled to the tower, like literally exiled to the tower. It's so sad.
Was he exiled there, or was it his choice to stay there because he really didn't want to be around Gavin?
I mean, maybe,
but even if it was his choice, it was because he was in an abusive situation. So it's hard to say that he made a choice as a child,
Yeah. Even if he was
even after Gavin's out of the picture, he I think he moves back downstairs, but he still sort of keeps this room in the tower, which is, I like that idea.
Yeah, I love, again, some of the just some of the ways that Dunnett phrases things around Philippa in this chapter. There's some really lovely things on the first one. The bit about in October, Philippa Somerville, a stickler for the more remote social graces, like as opposed to the social graces you have within your presence. She's it was to be a long newsy letter, effective in spelling and conveying implicitly in its latter pages an explicit injunction. And just this idea that she's trying, what she's trying to do in this letter. And of course we end up having the sad fate of the letter, but and then this bit is so good. The fact that Francis Crawford's mother had made no such request, from the injunction from his mother to come home at once. So the fact that Francis Crawford's mother had made no such request, and before she did so would bleed in her coffin like a pie meat, was a matter of minor importance. So that's just delightful. Both that Sibylla would never say that, and that Philippa was like, I don't care. He needs to come home because his mother needs him.
So are you finished summarizing? Should we dive into the chapter?
Yeah, let's just dive into what's in there.
Okay. So I was going to say there are some things I thought were notable in here. One is that she's growing apart from Kazum now, and he doesn't need her anymore, and Kate is seeing more of him than she does, which is sad, but also kind of frees her up for her subsequent adventures, so sort of necessary.
Yeah. It's also interesting that ostensibly they think that Kazuma is Francis's son. So he ends up with Kate, who is zero connection to him at all. We assume the mid-culture people, or they assume the mid-culture people have at least a blood connection to him. And Philippa has sort of an adoptive connection to him, but Kate has no connection to him, and she's the one that he ends up with, which is interesting.
I'm a little surprised that Sibylla doesn't quite warm up to Kazum. I actually thought in the first 3 chapters, her initial response was really good, and I thought that would continue, but it seems like she's definitely distancing herself from Kazum as much as possible.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
I think it has something to do with how she's feeling about Francis, and he's like because it talks about how she never spoke of his son. She never spoke of her son, and how that's connected to, it was notable also that how seldom she allowed herself close to her grandson. So something's going on with her, perhaps grief over Francis, and she's not allowing herself to be emotionally close to Kazum, which is kind of interesting considering Francis is also going through a lack of emotional connection to things around him. So
I'm wondering if Sibylla got some information about Francis's travels and knows that he met his sister, and now she feels a little guilty that she didn't tell him the full truth.
Maybe. She certainly wouldn't have heard anything from Sibylla. I mean, from Philippa.
Right.
Keeping the whole thing on the DL. So.
But I even wonder if she might sense that it's not actually her grandchild.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
I do think, though, that part of the reason why he goes with Kate kind of goes back to the conversation Lymond and Philippa had in Pawn, where she was like, Philippa was like, can I visit him? And Lymond was like, well, he's yours, of course. So he already kind of made it clear that the child is Philippa's more so than his.
Right.
So that sort of makes sense then, that the kid would go with Kate.
So Kate is the grandmother that is the one who has him. Yeah.
So also I think there's some really good details of this poor tragic Lymond childhood room, which is that it had, you know, no means of heating, so it's always cold. They're in Scotland, and there's the great splintered scar on the lute and the gouged timber on the door, like a boot had kicked it, which tells us, I think, a lot of what we have already speculated about Lymond's childhood and relationship to Gavin.
Like either he's been locked in this room and is sort of doing this like let me out and banging the door, or he shut himself in this room and is just venting like anger and frustration on the door. Either way.
Or he locked himself in and Gavin's like beating the door down trying to get in.
Oh, you're thinking it's on the outside. I thought all those marks are on the inside. Right. That would play to what we've seen before, where he locks himself in places. Yeah.
But it's just interesting because it's like we're seeing the books that formed him, but we're also seeing the screwed up parental situation that formed him. And there's a line that Sibylla says, which is ostensibly about the room, but is obviously actually about Lymond, where she says, "Some of the damage has been beyond me to mend."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I think everybody who knows him thinks that too. Like everybody who cares about him, not everybody who knows him, but everybody who cares about him thinks the same, you know, that
well, and specifically she's his mom, you know, she has been the counterbalance to Gavin, the one who made him, you know, not turn out like Marta, tried to build his capability to form human relationships and to be content, but you know, she couldn't single-handedly fix all of that given the screwed up situation he was in.
Yeah. And also I also love the image of this library that he's collected, and that he collected it like it was not easy to collect this library, that he spent time and money and effort, and that collecting these books was, you know, a quest of some sort, you know, and that if you read all the variety of what he has, like there's unpublished things, and clearly he's gone to so much trouble for it. So I like that.
It's interesting there's this thing about the books not being dusty, and so I'm like, has Sibylla been going in there reading the books? Like, why aren't the books dusty? Because we know Lymond hasn't.
Somebody's been cleaning it. So yeah,
she just has it cleaned.
I doubt it's Richard.
No way. Either Sibylla's been going up there and like dusting, or there's been somebody whose job it's been to keep the room nice. But it's going to be directed by Sibylla either way, right? So yeah.
Good. So jumping ahead from the childhood room, I wanted to ask you guys your thoughts on Austen Gray, who calls every Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm suspicious, as usual, as I'm always suspicious of random people. But he's I don't know, there was something later. They seem very invested, Austen Gray and Tom Wharton, on this in her. And I find that weird, slightly. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand the political dynamics of it, but Austen has this whole interaction with Margaret at the end of the chapter. And it's just, I don't know.
Okay, we can wait till we get there. I don't want to skip ahead too far. There's the bit about him visiting every Tuesday and the fact that therefore he's the one that takes the letter.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. As soon as she handed the letter over to Austen, I was like, that probably wasn't the best idea. I just feel like whatever information Austen gets will immediately get back to Margaret Lennox. So
yeah, and I wonder if there's something about her, like what is it about Philippa that Austen is interested in? And I mean, I think the simple explanation, like the surface explanation could be like, well, she's this sophisticated young girl and is attractive, and like she's come back from this exotic location and has all the, you know, whatever. Like that is the simplistic explanation, I think. But I'm really curious politically, what can she bring, or what is it that he wants from her?
Well, and she's also wealthy, and from everything that's been said about her, is soon to be divorced.
Single, right? So is he
Mhm.
just trying to get her money? Is there something else to it? I don't know.
So suspicious of poor little Austin.
So suspicious.
Well,
Like hanging out with Margaret Lennox doesn't help.
he's
No, that never looks good on anyone.
So we also have Philippa being introduced to Lymond's family in her extraordinary persona of Philippa Crawford of Lymond, Countess of Seveny. And she learned to keep a straight face while being so addressed.
Yeah.
So I love that, obviously, because it's hilarious. And it is so funny because he's Lymond and she's, you know, just this kid, and yet here she is, you know, continuing to come into her own. So she takes this interest in his family, and we learn about these two mystery relatives, Sibylla's sister, the abbess, and Lymond's great uncle, Leonard Bailey.
Which was an interesting little section where you're like, why do we care about this great uncle? We're like, oh, right. We're going to London.
Why does Philippa care so much about this stuff?
So interesting. Well, she's trying to figure out Lymond's parentage and Marta, and she's trying to solve this mystery of, she thinks, my understanding of what it is that she thinks if she can prove to Lymond that Sibylla did not cheat on Gavin, then like his image of his mother will be, you know, restored or pristine or whatever, and he'll come home. I don't think that's actually true, in the sense that I'm not sure that that's going to fix everything if she's able to prove this thing. But I think that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to figure out the family secrets and figure out what happened 25, 30 years ago in this family. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. And her interest, therefore, is in Sibylla's happiness and health. And
yeah, and by extension, Lymond's. You know.
Yeah. So we do get the news of Leonard Bailey having accepted English money for basically spying on King James, the previous Scottish king, and therefore moving to England. I guess just keep in mind for the future, since we don't actually meet him in this chapter.
Right. And then we get this really like kind of dumb comment from Richard about how like his uncle was sort of made this scandalous decision and got exiled to England or whatever. And so then Richard says, it perhaps explains why my father was quite so hard on Francis. Although he always maintained his uncle was ill done by and used to send him money, I believe up to the time that he died, his name was Leonard Bailey. And I'm like, does that really explain why your dad was so hard on Francis? Like, no.
I like that insight into Richard, though, that he's still just kind of clueless about how screwed up the dad was toward Lymond.
So clueless. And like our uncle was like this shady guy, and that's why my dad was such a dick to my younger brother. Like, no.
And he was a dick to Lymond from like Lymond's early childhood.
Yeah.
So, you know,
no, not at all.
So we have Sibylla taking this excuse to go visit the abbess by finding occasion to visit her friend Agnes Harries and her 7 children.
I know. How did she have 7 children so quickly?
That was a nice
4 years. There must be some twins or triplets in there.
I like the implication like that those two were really in love, so they're just going at it like bunnies all the time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They're just procreating a lot. So it's so cute. Yeah,
Let's not think about how old Agnes was when she got married.
let's not go there.
Good old Agnes. I've missed her.
But
I know. I wish we got to like see her and hang out.
yeah. I want to Google and find out, like, did she die of like a ripe old age with lots of grandchildren or something? I hope so.
I think so. Yeah.
So.
So then thoughts on this whole exchange with the abbess and the information that she reveals about Lymond's parentage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Philippa is very quick to just believe everything that the abbess is saying, which I can understand. You would believe something that a holy person would be telling you. I don't know if I necessarily believe it. I don't think I want to believe it. I really want Sibylla to actually be Lymond's mother.
Well,
So,
I 100% don't believe it because of the top of 62, where it says, the boy and the girl, Francis and his sister Eloise, were base born of unknown mother or mothers in France, and Sibylla was there for each birth and brought each child as her own back to Scotland. What? Like, Sibylla was there for the birth of these kids. I'm like, no, they're her kids. Like, she birthed them. That's why she was there for it. She just went to France, and she was in France for some reason. Like, yeah. I totally think that she's their mom. We just have random man that we don't know about yet.
right. So when she was in France, she was with someone that wasn't Gavin, and that's why she came back with those.
Yeah.
So maybe the abbess is not lying. Maybe she's telling her version of the truth, what she always believed.
Well, I mean, that is true. Like, she's not wrong. The kids are illegitimate, Francis, Eloise, or at least that seems that way. And Sibylla was there for the birth because they were hers. Yeah, I will be super surprised if there's actually random women here. It's got to be Sibylla and some guy. And I don't think we've met the guy yet, because I just don't get any sense that the men that we know in the story are the dad. So.
Do you agree with Philippa's belief that the root of Lymond's absence was his meeting with Marta?
I mean, it's a large portion of it, because it's the thing that started. I mean, there was always that question of doubt in the back of his mind, even from the first book. We got very small clues that Richard and Lymond may not actually be full brothers. So there's been that rumor around, and there's that, nagging doubt in the back of his mind. And coming face to face with Marta only brought it to the forefront. There may be some other reasons why he doesn't want to face Sibylla at the moment, but I think that's a good portion of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably why he doesn't want to be around his mother right now, perhaps. But I think the trauma of Una's death and the trauma of his son's death, and just the accumulation of trauma piled on trauma, he doesn't want to go back to mid-culture. Like, how would he fit in? Like, what would he do? He goes home to Scotland, and he's like dealing with opium withdrawal and all of that. Like, how is he going to fit in his home and like slide back into this Lymond, uncle of Travis and Lucy, and like younger brother of Richard, and how is he going to slide back into that role with everything that he's been through in the last year? I just think he just can't. So
Did Sibylla hear the vow that he made in the chapel, that he was going to find his son and do everything in his power to save him?
I think she would have found out about it from Richard if she didn't hear it.
So, I mean, I think Francis feels like he failed that vow. And if he knows that Sibylla overheard it, he may just feel, well, I don't want to face my mother because I failed in this vow that I made that she overheard. That might be part of it too.
Yeah. I think there's a lot. I think it's complicated. It's a complicated mess, and there's so much that's, and sometimes you just, sometimes you just can't face things, you know, when bad things happen and you just can't face things. And so he's gone to Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back would force him to explain himself, and he can't, like, he's too traumatized to even like process it and deal with it. And then don't forget also the prophecy that he'll never see his brother again. So either if he comes back, either Richard's going to die, or he'll realize Richard is not his brother, and either one is unacceptable.
Oh, that's right, because he knows about the prophecy that was yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that this could be some sort of protection of Richard.
But I think it's all of the above, and I think even going way back, even before Una died, like the instant he met Marta, I think he was like, you know, red alert, like can't deal.
Yeah, I do. Going back to this discussion with the abbess, I do like this phrase again from Philippa, which is just another confirmation of her, like the way that she thinks about people, where she says, you are what you are, birth can hardly change it. And the abbess is sort of like, aren't you worried about the stigma and everything? And Philippa is just like, no, people are people. And it's just another sign of her, like, kind of practical, pragmatic nature, and she's not caught up in appearances. And one of the things that I wonder about her is that she's gone through this training in the Seraglio, and so she has a real deep understanding of appearances and like what appearances can do and how you can fake, you know, how you present yourself and how you do things with your body, and so she really understands those things, and so perhaps is like, it's fake, and she understands it to the point that she's able to say, like, this isn't authentic, and it's the core of a person that makes them authentic, you know. So
well, and I think also, like, we're starting to get the hints of a theme, which is that your birth doesn't matter, who you are matters, which isn't just about Lymond, it's also about Kazum.
Yeah. It's
because I mean, if he really is the creepy incest baby of Gabriel and Jolita, like, ooh, but at the same time, it's not his fault. He's an innocent kid. It doesn't do anything wrong with him.
Yep. His destiny is not determined by his parentage. And I think that Philippa believes that.
So. Yeah. Although she, of course, has no idea at this point.
Right. But it speaks well for perhaps his future, you know, that his adopted mother will be okay with him being a creepy incest baby.
Okay, move on to the next section.
So then we get a whole bunch of political stuff, which is what I wrote in my book. Political stuff. It's just like, all right. So we get this bit about, like, Queen Mary is planning to marry Philip of Spain, which I did love this line. It's where Mary says she's going to consult with God on the matter and nobody else, which greatly disturbed everybody. And you just get the sense that people are kind of like, oh, this is a dumb idea, but she goes ahead with it.
The monarch making decisions without the agreement of Parliament is not a good precedent.
Not a good precedent. And there's this whole idea about people just really don't think that she can have a kid because she's too old, and so there's some sort of shady comments that are made about that. But yeah, it's all. And then we come to Margaret Douglas / Lennox, who interestingly has a fair-haired young boy of 8, which, didn't we have a whole discussion about how we don't think this is Lymond's kid?
Yeah, it couldn't be Lymond's kid, but he keeps playing up the rumor because it's just a way to screw with her.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. I knew we'd had that discussion earlier. I just couldn't remember, like, why we came to that conclusion.
Yeah, there was a lot of that in the second book, I think.
Yeah. That's right. And Margaret is not happy about the news that Lymond is married to, as she puts it, this farmer's daughter from Hexham. So she's annoyed.
She's so jealous and just enraged.
Yep.
And at the same time, like she hates Lymond and wants to kill him. It's like she's so possessive in her like obsessive lust.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's a bit where she's like, how old is she? 14? And Austin says 17. And it says he had displeased her. So pissed that Philip is like, old enough to be sexually mature.
Yeah. She is not happy. And then in the midst of this anger and not happy, she decides to bring Philippa to the court, which my note to myself off to the side was crap. Like, oh man, not good. Except that I really, really want Philippa to have the tools to deal with Margaret Lennox. Like, just that we do have a sense that she's able to navigate sort of tricky political waters, and that she does understand like being vulnerable to powerful women and what that can do to you. Like, she has a sense of that. And so I just hope going forward that we'll see her and Margaret Lennox sort of do this dance, if you will, or like this sort of having these verbal battles and power battles, but that Philippa can hold her own in that. I really hope that's where we're going in the book, because I want to see that. So
yeah, I think it's interesting because like not much actually happens, but it's also ominous because we remember like the last time Margaret Lennox was jealous of a woman Lymond was involved with, it was Christian Stewart, and she got her killed. So there's this axe hanging over Philippa's head that if she steps the wrong way, Margaret Lennox is going to get her.
Does Philippa know how devious Margaret Lennox is?
How would she?
I don't think so.
Well, I was trying to think back in the first book when Christian had her accident. Was she brought to Flaw Valleys to recover, and that's where she passed?
Yeah, she died in the music room. Or the
But Philippa would have been too young to know Margaret was implicit in that. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if she was aware of that or not.
Like,
Kate, maybe. See, Gideon knew, but I don't know if Gideon would have told.
I mean, they were really they had a real partnership. He might have told her. Like, there's a possibility that Philippa could know from her mom. Like, I could see Kate sort of trying to if Kate knows that Philippa is going to court, which I don't know, do they interact in between her being summoned to court and going to court? I don't know if she's able to interact with Kate. But if Kate knew that she was going, she would arm Philippa with all the information she could. That's reasonable, but I don't know if they interact before.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's a stretch to be like Gideon would have told Kate, and then like Kate, 10 years later would tell Phil, like 10 years later.
My whole thought about Philippa being summoned to court was she's going right back into the seraglio, except this time the dangers are a little bit different, and she's not aware of how dangerous it could be for her.
I don't know though. I wonder if she is going to be able I don't think she's not naive anymore. She's not this innocent, completely unaware kid from the country who doesn't understand or has never witnessed like political machinations from people who are jockeying for power. So there's at least a sense, I think, where she can go into the court and at least be watching for things. Like, I think she can go in. I'm hoping she's going to go in and like not take what people tell her at face value, look for factions, try to figure out who the factions are. That seems like a reasonable skill that she has. Maybe.
And I'm sure with, the good head she has on her shoulders, she'll be able to suss out Margaret Lennox pretty quickly and realize, ooh, she's manipulative.
And you also get the sense that Philippa is not at risk of being flattered. To like I don't think if people because that's such a flattery and trying to curry favor is such a part of that culture. But I can't see Philippa falling for that. Like, if people start trying to like butter her up or whatever, like, I hope at least, like, that's not gonna sway her at all, because she's just too practical.
So I also just enjoyed these moments with Margaret where Tom Wharton is observing, right? The effort behind her very detachment told Tom Wharton all he wanted to know. She's pretending to be like disinterested in Lymond's marriage, but ooh, she's interested. And then this like blank pause and this burst of laughter when she finds out about the kid.
Mhm. Yep, she is so jealous. Also, what's up with Thomas Wharton?
What do you mean?
I don't know. I'm curious about this man. Like, what's going on? Like, he's clearly super interested in what Margaret Lennox is doing, and he's paying very close attention to her. And
Well, he's a political player and she's a powerful political player. So I think he's just observing what's going on and he sees the political risk of Lymond having an alliance with Philippa, who is on the borders. And he also doesn't like Lymond. Lymond dropped the burning helmet on his son's head back in the day, right?
right.
I mean, I think the dynamic between Wharton and Austen Gray is actually interesting, and I guess it's very subtextual. But like we have Margaret Lynn is calling Philippa a poor, misguided child, and Austen Gray attempting to remonstrate, and Tom Wharton like talking over Austen to stop Austen. He wins. And then Austen sharply defending Philippa's marriage and arguing with Tom. Tom, you know as well as I do, this was a regular marriage. And then you also have at the end, Tom Wharton stepping on Austen Gray's foot to get him to shut up. So these two are not actually on the same page with each other at all.
Yeah. I'm guessing Austen's significantly younger, right? He would be Philippa's generation, and
yeah, she remembers him from childhood.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, this is actually part of what makes me curious about Tom Wharton, is because, like, stepping on Austen's foot, just be like, shut up, and I'm just so curious about the two of them, and they're not on the same page. So, like, which page are both of them on is interesting. We'll see. I don't know.
So then I was just going to mention, because you kind of skimmed over the political stuff, but I think it's an interesting mechanism Dunnett uses to introduce it, which is that she introduces it to us by giving us information that Lymond is getting from his spy network. So we actually meet his network of spies. And we already knew about Hercules Tate, and then we find out about an anonymous banker in Brussels, Nicholas Applegarth, who we may remember as the guy who was keeping 70 for Lymond, is sending info. Desor, the knight at Malta that we remember from the third book, is sending info. Meekall is sending info. Someone Guthrie knows, Bartholomew Lynchpole in England, is sending info. So even though Lymond is way far away in Russia, he's still got his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the politics of Europe.
Yeah.
That's where I remembered that name from.
Which one?
Bartholomew Lynchpole.
Yes.
Because he shows up right at the end of chapter 6 again.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know I've read that name, but where was it?
Yep. Yeah. And I think of this political info, the interesting bits is probably Mary Tudor having resumed the cutting of heads as she brings back the Catholic religion. And the emperor being worried about his son Philip's behavior, and then his son Philip being late for going to England. So we already have, the hints of this marriage is not going to go well for poor Mary Tudor.
Yeah. And she's and you get that, I think it's in this bit too, where you get that little bit about how people were lighting off cannons when Elizabeth went by, and so that's not, like, Mary's not fond of that. And
yeah, you got the rivalry with Elizabeth, and the fact that the whole, not only like not the whole political situation, but also the whole religious situation could turn as soon as Mary dies, if Elizabeth then becomes queen, which we know she will.
Right. And yeah, we're gonna flip the politics, we're gonna flip the religion, we're gonna flip everything. And so what is Mary gonna get done before she dies? And she's desperate to have a kid. I think she ends up having like I forget what they call it, a fake pregnancy that that is, it looks like she's pregnant and she feels pregnant, but she's not actually pregnant. And there's this idea that like she was so desperate to have a kid that she sort of, her body tricked her into thinking she was pregnant. So
Is Queen Mary the queen that Olivia Colman played in The Favorite, or was that someone else?
no, that was Anne.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which is later.
Later. Yeah.
Because I know Queen Mary doesn't last long.
Yeah, she wants an heir, and as we know, she doesn't get one since Elizabeth becomes queen. But yeah, she wants the heir not only for herself to have a kid, but because it's literally like the entire future of Catholicism in England is dependent on this kid.
Right. Which does not appear.
Yeah, and then we also have Margaret Douglas being at the highest favor. Basically, there are a few closer to Queen Mary, and all these honors that she has. So
Yeah.
she is in like the top of her power too.
Yeah, it'll be intriguing because Mary's not going to last much longer, right? She's only like, I don't know, like a couple more years. She's not in great health or anything. So I wonder if Margaret Lennox, what's going to happen when the power situation changes, and if she's so high and so favorite. Usually those people don't do very well when the next monarch comes around. So what will happen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any final thoughts on chapter 4?
Just Laura had mentioned it earlier, that very last sentence, and Austen Gray, flushing, confirmed shortly that he would be pleased to escort Mistress Philippa Somerville in any way the Countess might indicate. So we get sort of some interesting knowledge about what Austen Gray may be thinking. I don't know. I think there's some attraction there.
Yeah, I mean, he visits every Tuesday. He's passionately defending her to these grown-ups, having a grown-up conversation. And he's just like, don't be mean to Philippa.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'll go get her. I'll do anything you want to go get her. And yet he's also so connected to Margaret Lennox. So that's interesting.
Where's Matthew?
Well, we all know Matthew is not the real player in this family.
No, he's not at all. There's been no mention of him at all, even in the next 2 chapters. And I'm like, is he off doing something? Is he there and just not important? So
Margaret probably sent him somewhere, got him out of the way. Who knows?
Stop messing up my plans. Go be quiet somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so then we have chapter 5, which starts out with kind of a look at what Gazelle has been up to, like her life and how she's sort of interacting with the powers that be in Moscow. Yeah. Yes, we could chat about that. And then we get into sort of what's going on with St. Mary's and how are the St. Mary's folks preparing to create this army and all of that. So thoughts on Gazelle and what's going on with her?
Well, there's a line in this that I think confirms the interpretation of the whole thing about the jewel in the box, where it says, it was also a certainty, though from what source no one knew, that it was Gazelle who had brought to the Tsar this inestimable band of Western trained soldiers, and that it was her resources which had furnished both the journey and the splendors of the residence which he shared. So her power is coming from like her bringing these gifts to the Tsar. So she's not Lymond's mistress so much as like Lymond is her gift to the Tsar.
Yeah, she is the power that's playing here. I liked this paragraph on 68 where there's a lot of things, but it says, Gazelle, knowledgeable in the ways of both men and women and accustomed to ruling steel within silk, the still greater establishment of the Stambul harem made no inexpedient advances, but waited, allowing, etc. So it's just this little capsule of her, like she understands people, she understands how power works, she's patient, she's not doing anything that's, not going to serve her purposes. So yeah.
Gazelle, master of politics. Wonder what would happen if she and Margaret Lennox were in the same room.
That would be interesting. Yeah. So other thoughts other thoughts on the politics that they kind of explain here? She's kind of becoming getting an in with the Tsar's wife, Anastasia, I think is her name, and meeting other women who are sort of part of various factions.
I will say it's boring. I don't care about Gazelle, and I don't care about Russian politics and the Russian wives.
Maybe not.
It is interesting that she's giving a lot of information about the Sultan Suleiman and his empire to the Russians. So like, is she completely separated herself from Suleiman and Dragut? Or is she just giving them this information in order to, get a leg up in the politics of Russia at the moment?
I think she just does whatever's expedient. Her goal is her own power. She doesn't have loyalty to anything.
Sure.
Yeah. So we transition from that section into the St. Mary's section, and it's talking about Lymond and how Lymond is how Lyman's interacting with the St. Mary's people, and we just get another sense of how cold emotionally he is, and he's present in terms of strategy and engaging with them in preparation, but he's completely withdrawn in terms of like building rapport with the men and socializing with them on just a pure social level. He's not doing that. And then we get this big old list of like all the different guys and what they're doing, and I sort of cracked up. There's a bit where it's later on, but there's a bit where Plumber and Danny they're looking at wood and whatever. Anyway, it's like they're building like prefab houses in Russia, and so it's just sort of like IKEA in the 16th century. Like they've got all pre-cut wood, and you just go to the place and you say, I would like a 4-room house, and then they just boom 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 boom, like here you go. So anyway, I cracked up at that. But there's also this section about this that I have a question about. There's this beautiful boy called Vincelis, and he comes up later where Lymond tries to give him back to Gazelle, and then they have this whole conversation later that I was super confused about, and so I want to talk about it when we get there. But that the beautiful boy is introduced in this section.
I think it's Venceslas.
Venceslas? Okay. Oh, like Wenceslas. That makes sense. Venceslas. Yeah. Anyway, he's pretty. And Lymond's servant. But yeah, so we just get this summary of what all the guys are doing, and they're doing their various expertise bits.
My interpretation of this section is that Dorothy Dunnett had gotten a lot of praise for her historical research, and so she was like, wow, I'm great at this, everyone loves it, and so she did a ton of it, and she just info dumped it all in here, and it's way too much because we don't care.
Yeah, that's why this chapter was very hard for me to focus on.
Yeah, it's like, okay, they did all the stuff. Trying to see if and then after we get all the boring pages of logistics done, Lymond has this interview with Ivan, which is the tension that goes back and forth between them in these couple of pages is interesting, I thought. Yeah, so thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we start to see right away that Ivan is like unstable, like he's heard things, and so he's coming in like, enraged and angry, and I'm gonna kill you. And I've done all these horrible things by my orders. I strangled this guy, and I had this guy's tongue cut out, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, like, chill. And then we have Lymond kind of like walking this like knife edge tightrope of like appeasing this person who is clearly unstable and violent and powerful. And he gets him to laugh by making a joke about STDs, I guess. And like it gets Ivan to laugh and then gets him on his good side. But you're basically like Lymond is playing this very dangerous game with the Tsar, and he thinks he can win and or he doesn't really care either way. But he's certainly in a precarious position.
Yeah, the Tsar's instability, you just get the sense that this man has so much power and he's so unstable that we can't depend on Lymond's like verbal powers to get him out of this necessarily. Like maybe it will work, but maybe he will end up mutilated. And it's not like he can logic Ivan, or he can't use logic, he can't use like persuasive elements, because maybe it will work, maybe it won't, because he's super unstable. So it's a nice danger for Lymond in terms of the reader. Like I'm worried for him.
Yeah, and like we get this sense of Ivan is completely driven by emotion, not by logic.
Yeah.
So, I speak of these things with sorrow after talking about ripping people's tongue out or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like Lymond, whose strength is logic, is going to have to switch to emotional manipulation. We see it works, right? He makes a joke, and that's what gets Ivan back on his side. But yeah, the logic thing isn't going to work because
like persuasive debate skills are not helpful here. And interestingly, like if Lymond is struggling to feel emotion, it's like this is his weakness right now in his life. Even if previous in his life he would have been able to manipulate Ivan's emotions with more savvy, right now he's handicapped in that part of his life. And so that's kind of makes it even more interesting. Also, Ivan like pulls his hair out by the roots, like just grabs a chunk of hair and like, oh, like, oh. So yeah, not great. There is a sense too that Ivan feels completely isolated and that he can't trust anyone around him, which probably makes a lot of sense. So that is definitely contributing to his instability. There's a point where he says in a low voice, which I interpreted to mean like quiet, like trying to avoid other people hearing. He says, "Lend me your honesty," Ivan said, and meeting his eyes, Lymond bowed once again without speaking. So this idea, if he thinks Lymond will be authentic with him, it might give Lymond a bit of an in with the Tsar. We shall see. So.
I found it interesting to learn that the Tsar is 26 at this moment, which actually I think by this time Lymond's probably 27. So it makes him a little bit older. I know he was 26 in the last book, but it's been a couple months since then. So he still could be 26. But just knowing that they're the same age, I actually thought the Tsar was going to end up being a bit older than that.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I like that they're the same age.
Yeah. So then we get this interview with, or conversation with Francis and Gazelle, which, like, she kind of gets him like half undressed, and we get the sense that he is not giving her what she wants in this area. Yeah. And I love this bit where she says, like, who do you think nursed you in those days out of Volos? And he says, Master Grossmeyer. Like, she's trying to be like, who do you think nursed you? And he's like, the doctor.
Well, and I like his reply, the sick do not interest you unless with very good reason.
Yeah.
He knows she's a woman in pursuit of power. She doesn't care about him, really.
Yeah. And I think you get a slight sense of Lymond's detachment when he's talking about Ivan, where he says, it's a gamble from moment to moment whether one is about to be embraced or garroted. And then he says, whether I can control the boyars at the same time is a matter which only the hangman will finally tell. And so he's kind of like, we'll figure out if I win, if I end up dead, like, if I end up alive, then I did it okay. If I end up dead, I didn't, and there's just a sense that he's slightly detached from.
Very detached, I think. We also have him waving aside wine, which it kind of goes with what we saw before. He's only going to drink if it's absolutely necessary for political reasons, but he's not going to choose to drink.
Yeah, socially. Yeah, so then he tells her after this bit about if I die, kind of maybe I'll die, maybe I won't. Gazelle, I wish you to take back Wenceslas. And then I prefer, and the reason he gives is I prefer not to be served out of gratitude. I don't know. What's your take on this whole thing with Wenceslas? And is it because he thinks he's a spy for Gazelle? Like, I mean, he probably is, but is that a problem? What do you think?
Well, so there's a bit more in here. We get this idea that she rescued him from an inn he was slaving for. What he was doing in that inn is left ambiguous, but he could have been a child prostitute. She ends up saying that she will take Wenceslas to be her own servant.
And he understands something, but it's like, I understand. And then he looks up sharply, what do you understand? And then she smiles. What were you thinking of? Necromancy? I'm like, what are we talking about here?
Well, she says what she understands is that of normal human impulses, you experience nothing. Yeah. And he says, all I can give you is Russia. So I think they're arguing about she wants sex with Lymond.
Right.
And if he won't have it with her, then she'll take Wenceslas and sleep with him instead.
Okay. Because I thought it was something about like she was using Wenceslas as like a temptation for Lymond, that he wasn't picking up the bait.
I think she was. I think she's trying to like tempt him. Like, hey, I know you're recovering, but like, look at this pretty boy. Do you want it?
Beautiful boy. And he's just like, take him back.
Yeah. And she's like, fine, I guess you don't want sex, so I'll take him back and have sex with him myself. And Lymond is quite sharp in that moment, so he's not happy about that. He looks up sharply, his fringed eyes distended.
Yeah. And he's just like, I can do this political thing for you, but I'm not going to be with you in any way. Yeah. Okay. Also, who is, I confess I'm not doing, as usual, I'm not doing well with the names. So who is Vishnevetsky?
Oh, Vishnevetsky. I think he was in the beginning, the guy that traveled with her before Lymond.
Okay, so there's sort of like he's a player that she's trying to manipulate, and I had completely lost. Maybe it was in the midst of the political section that I wasn't paying too much attention to, but I lost like why it's important. If Lymond says, if I've laid my traps as I hope, Vishnevetsky will make some move in your direction or in mine. I want him to fight for us. And I was just like, who is that? But,
plot.
All right.
The interesting bit I think that happens next is the letter.
Yeah.
So what do you guys make of that? He starts reading it and he tosses it in the fire. He never gets to the part about Mom wants you to come home. The last bit that he seems to get to is about Kuzum. He's going to be tall.
Yeah, I guess that could be somewhat triggering.
Yeah.
Well, in particular, I think Gabriel is taller than Lymond.
Yeah.
And Gazelle even asked, does it remind you too much of the other?
Yeah. And then he sort of has this serene look on his face, meaning like he doesn't have an emotional look on his face, and then says, a moment ago, said Lymond with irony, you reminded me of my handicap. I've been cheated of the tender emotions, including nostalgia. And I find it interesting that he says it with irony, because it means he's not saying what he means, or what he's saying means something other than what it means explicitly. And yeah, so like is he upset that he's not feeling, like, is he saying, because he's saying, I've been cheated of the tender emotions, you're reminding me of my handicap. So is what Lymond actually saying here that he's not bothered by the fact that he's not feeling emotions, that he's actually, it's okay with him, because is he just afraid of what those emotions would be if he was feeling them? So the fact that he's not feeling him is not a handicap. He's not been cheated. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's sort of ambiguous at this point.
Yeah.
I think my interpretation is that he's just in denial and like in deep hibernation, and the Lymond we know is just like MIA at the moment, hidden very, very deep in his subconscious. And this is,
yeah, he's so numb. Like he's just feeling so numb.
Yeah. And then she has him play the harpsichord and he plays like a machine.
Yeah. Yeah, which they say multiple times, like that he's playing like a scalpel, which is a tool, that he's an impervious and versatile engine. Yeah. So
I do like that she tries to draw him out by giving him this opportunity, though, because it's been a while since we've seen him play any sort of music at all, and like he was sort of pushing it to the side in the past couple books. And now that he's finally back to it, it's mechanical and emotionless, just like the persona he's taken up.
yeah.
But I don't know that she's trying to draw him out, or if she's trying to, like, it calls him her protege. I don't necessarily think that her getting him to play music is trying to get his emotions to come out. It's more like to try to get him to behave like a person, even though he's not really feeling it.
Mm.
I mean, I don't think she has any sentimentality about Lymond at all. Like she wants to use him in all the ways that she can use him, including sexually and for power and all of this. And if he's not, I think she's not happy that he's not doing exactly what she wants, but she's still going to use him. So.
Well, and then we have the doctor speculating she did not expect to see her chosen escort reach the Tsar's like center of power before her, or to sleep alone in her bed while she did so. She is to be pitied. So this idea that she put in all this effort to bring this gift to the Tsar and get this guy in her service, and yet he is just this emotionless, cold being, and not what she was, hoping. It's not any fun.
And she doesn't quite have the control over him that she thought she would, because he's gotten into the center of power in ways that she hasn't. And yeah, so okay, then we get chapter 6, which has some nice bits in it, including the opening line, which I did really like, which is, as a highly qualified Turkish-trained concubine from the harem of Suleiman the Magnificent, Philippe of Somerville settled into English court life as a kite among chickens, and as a kite among kites into the Spanish court of the new king consort Philip. So you do get this sense that she's not a chicken. Like she is a little bit of a predator in this sense, and she's able to hold her own in some ways. So I loved that.
Yeah, I think it's if you think back to the Dame de Dutant sending her off to get polished up or whatever, like the education she got in Turkey is invaluable in her ability to survive and thrive in the English court.
Yeah. And I also wonder, I like that because she got this education in Turkey in a completely different culture, like I just wonder if she'll be able to hide what she's doing a little bit better than some people, like, because perhaps she'll have sort of ways of thinking about politics and ways of thinking about power structures that are foreign. And I wonder if I hope that's an advantage. I would really like to see Philippa just like plow her way through the English court in this one. I mean, I don't think she'll do that, but I would really like to see her be victorious in this very tricky situation.
But she can definitely use what she's learned to her advantage. And I don't think anybody in the court would expect that of her.
Yeah, I really hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, a minute ago we had Margaret Lennox going, what is she, 14?
Mhm.
Right.
No one
Yeah.
knows this.
Just
Yeah.
like Lymond, everybody's underestimating her, even
Yes,
her age and stature. So
And everyone is going to underestimate her because she's a farm girl from Hexham, so
I
they're
think
just,
she's gonna give Margaret Lennox a run for her money.
I hope so. I hope that's where the story is going.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
yeah.
interesting that we have Philippa dealing with her instead of Lymond in this. So
Yeah. So this chapter starts out with Philippa is going to the Sydneys, which so my immediate, this is the thing that I did in chapter 6 that I was like, wait, is this going where I think it's going? So when we found out about the Sydneys, I was like, wait, is Philip Sidney going to be a character in this book? And Philip Sidney is a really famous English poet that I had to study a lot when I was getting my master's. And so I was like, wait, are we going to Philip Sidney? And then like towards the end of the chapter, their kid is born and it's Philip. And I was like, yes. But of course he's a baby, so he's not going to be writing poetry as, whatever, an infant, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think it's like a information overload, a lot of this with all these new characters, but it is a really interesting setting. The Sydneys are these super worldly people amidst the early Renaissance, and so Philippa is in a place where there's this description of it where she meets poets and politicians, churchmen, navigators, merchant adventurers, scholars from Oxford and Cambridge, men who talked about hops and men who talked about ironworks. And Philippa spends most of her time with them because she's already learned all the feminine arts in Turkey. So she's getting this up to the minute Renaissance education, and particularly like education in this early age of exploration before it became like the evils of colonialism, when it was just like, let's see if we can sail somewhere new, and it was really exciting.
Yeah, and she had this foundation that she got from Lymond's library and all of that. So she comes into this like super worldly conversations and all that with this foundation that is serving her so well. Yeah, so it's kind of cool in the midst of all this exposition.
Yeah, and they recognize her for her uniqueness and wit also, so she seems to get on quite well there.
Yeah. Also, she's still looking for Leonard Bailey, who has been withheld so discreetly from her attention. So we get the sense that he's been deliberately hidden from her and she knows it. And so she's curious about this guy, which I am now curious about the guy because we'll see. And she's got Foggy with her.
yay, Foggy's back.
Yeah.
I do also, or Fog.
I know, but I just because Philippe calls her Foggy, so I'm gonna call her.
Even if it's pronounced Fog, I'm gonna keep saying Foggy because I love it.
We also have Philippa's thoughts on Lymond, where she thinks of him as a worldly and middle-aged man. So I know ages were different back then, but I still don't think 26 is middle-aged. So she's still got some learning to do about who he actually is.
Yeah, 26 is middle aged, then I'm super old.
Elderly.
Oh,
Elderly. God. Tottering on the brink of the grave. I like that. I do like that. You're right. As she's learning more and more about Lymond, she still doesn't know him, and they still haven't interacted in a deep and meaningful way, like at all. And they've had these moments of connection that have been very brief, but in terms of like actually engaging with each other in a real sense, they haven't done that. And
I mean, maybe the only time was when like he begged her to let him kill himself and she wouldn't let him, but like, yeah, in the middle of the night in the dark.
Yeah. So we'll see. And we get the sense that Philippa is going into this new lifestyle, new culture. So she discovers a way of life with no parallel in Flaw Valley's which I said correctly, or Malta or Turkey or Richard Crawford's cordial and uncomplicated household in Scotland.
Right, and that's the Sydneys and their
And this,
explorers and stuff.
so it's cool.
Um,
Okay, so then we get, all this bit at the Sydneys, this conversation with Dick and Chancellor, which goes on for a while. We sort of get introduced to Jane Dormer, who is her future companion. Yeah.
We also have it's Madame Donati's money she's been spending, not the Dame de Dutance's. I forgot that she also got the Donati inheritance.
Yeah, I had forgotten that too.
I did enjoy the bit with Henry Sidney where he describes meeting Lymond 3 years ago, where he was distinguishing himself in various unusual positions as a herald of the Queen Dowager of Scotland. Half the French court, male and female, were angling for his attentions, as I remember.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious because it's so different from how he is now. Like the Lymond of Queensway is just like, how is that even the same character? He's changed so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that, people who don't know what he's been through are still thinking of him as this, decadent bisexual adventurer. And
Right.
and then the Lymond we see in Russia won't even sleep with his super hot mistress.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have this whole business about Russia and sailing to Russia, and somebody died on the way to Russia, and there's, Russia's cold, and
so it's kind of boring. It's exposition. All you really need to know is that Dick and Chancellor, we looked at the map at the beginning, right, where you can sail from England to Russia by going north, right? So Dickon is the first guy that ever did that. And when he did it, there was this other guy with him named Hugh Willoughby, who had 2 ships, and Dickon had 1. And somehow Hugh Willoughby managed to get himself lost and stranded and dead. So that's basically it. Chancellor came back, Willoughby didn't.
Is that trade route sailing up above Scandinavia to northern Russia, or is it sailing sort of between the European continent and the Scandinavian peninsula, or does it matter?
I think it's north because it's super cold.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the map and there's 2 different ways you could go there.
Yeah, I think it's the north.
Okay, so up above Norway.
Yeah.
Where they can land at Cape Sweetnose.
Yeah, so I do like this bit at sort of when Chancellor is leaving, he's taking his leave of them, and he says, "I do not go because I'm tired of you or because I find your entertainment burdensome, but because I'm wrecked on the wit of your women. Mistress Somerville, I have to thank you on Nick and Christopher's behalf for your interest in them. Take heed at court. There are more monsters there than there are born in the ocean." And it's just a nice little bit of, foreshadowing perhaps that things are going to happen. And then this, I think, is it Henry who says it? Yeah, Henry says, "To laugh, to lie, to flatter, to face, 4 ways in court to win men's grace." And then Ascham will like her. "I think I shall entrust her classical training to Ascham," said Sir Henry, blah, blah, blah. So just this idea that there are 4 tools you can use in court: laugh, lie, flatter, face. So we shall see how Philippa does.
I think a possible prediction, if and when Philippa learns that Lymond is in Russia, she could possibly, if Dickon is traveling back and forth, maybe send messages through with him.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think she knows that at this point. So
no, because she sent a letter to McCall, and McCall obviously knows where he is, so that's how it got to him. But she has no way of knowing if her letter even arrived. She has no way to get any confirmation for that. So
no, and I don't think Lymond's going to write back.
I just say, unless he writes her back, and he's not going to do that at this point. No. Okay, so then we have this bit at the end with Margaret Lennox and Philippa, and I think we're getting a slight picture of what might be happening for in the story for Philippa. How does she I love that we do get a sense that she's able to dissemble, if you will. So it says she's talking, she's with the queen, she's having an audience with the queen, and Margaret Lennox is there. And Margaret says, the daughter of Gideon Somerville, da da da. It says, Philippa, who was wearing a great many jewels, rose from her curtsy and with an effort equally invisible, refrained from replying. So we get this sense that she's able to control herself and what she says, and she's able to do it invisibly. So she's not giving anything away.
Which is really different than the kind of young, youthful, outbursting Philippa that we met before. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also just amused by this image of Mary, who's not an attractive woman, surrounded by extremely plain women, all except one, the Countess of Lennox. Like these sort of drab women, and then this glorious Margaret Lennox positioning herself as like the next one to take power.
Yeah. Which, if we didn't know English history, might actually be a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't know what's going to happen. Like, looking at where she is in this time, the likelihood of her being the next queen is probably pretty high.
Decent. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a bit with the queen. Again, we get this whole, there's no heir. That Charles is concerned about that. I mean, the emperor is concerned about that.
So I know Mary is like really drab and she burns people at the stake, but I think the worst part of it is this thing where she gets up at like daybreak, spends hours in mass, works nonstop till midnight, and never touches food before 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Like, what a miserable person. And poor Philippa has to follow this awful schedule.
Yeah. And you just kind of get the sense that Mary's life was miserable. Like she's been doing this her whole life. This is how she was taught to live, and just had a miserable existence. And then she had all this pressure as a queen, and then she died in misery, and she made a whole bunch of other people miserable while she was alive. Like,
it sucks for her, and I feel bad for her, but also just like sucks for everybody around her.
Yeah, and she killed a bunch of people and made everybody miserable.
It is to some degree. It's like, you're the queen, like you could change this. But
yeah, you're the queen. Do what you want.
Smile sometimes. Maybe then your husband would want to hang out with you.
That what?
Maybe if you smiled sometimes, your husband would want to hang out with you.
Yeah. Okay, so then we just kind of get some bits about Philippa at court and this Don Alfonso Duranda, the secretary to the Prince of Melito. And then Lady Lennox appears and we have this whole exchange with them. So thoughts on this?
Well, so the main thing they're talking about is who Philippa's Latin tutor will be or is.
Right. These two guys who the two options hate each other.
Yeah, and the two of them hate each other. And so we're torn between Roger Ascham, who she's studying with, and John Elder, who is the one who's teaching Darnley, Margaret Lennox's son.
Right.
But I think you have to go like read up on them because they are real historical characters and they really did have a rivalry to figure out like the political implications of Philippa preferring Ascham over Elder. But we can sort of extrapolate that Elder's probably a dick because we know that Darnley turns out horrible.
Right. And Ascham is Henry's the one who set her up with him, right?
Right. So the more like worldly and probably
right. So she's kind of like I get the feeling that Philippa's like, thanks, but no thanks.
Yes, I already have a Latin tutor, thanks.
Yeah,
I have a better Latin tutor than your Latin tutor.
Yeah. Thanks for the offer. I have a guy. Yeah. So then, and we end up with this bit about Bartholomew Lynch poll at the very end of this chapter, which I put question marks for because it's so Margaret is talking to Bartholomew Lynch poll, and it's like, so end of the chapter.
Yeah, what do you guys think it's leading to or leading up to? Because it's definitely set up, and since I already know what happens, I don't want to say anything.
Yeah. Well, we already know that he's writing to Lymond, right? Lynchpole? Yeah. So if he's one of Lymond's sources for information, like, this is interesting. Is Lymond going to be getting, hey, your wife's up to this at the court, and Margaret Lennox has, got it in for her, and I don't know. That'll be interesting.
Well, I mean, this is still rather new in Philippa's being there, so I'm not sure if she's sort of written another letter to Lymond to let him know, hey, I'm in Queen Mary's court now. Guess what?
BT dubs.
So this could be how Lymond finds out.
You think he's going to come sailing home to rescue Philippa from Margaret Lennox?
No, but I think that having Philippa in the English court and next to Margaret Lennox will help him keep track of things, and it's a tool that he could use to his advantage in some way.
I mean, I think it depends on, like, does he trust Philippa to be able to take care of herself or not? Because we know that he feels responsible for her. Like, we know whether, I mean, maybe he's not feeling so much now with the whole opium withdrawal thing, but we know that he does feel responsible for her because he married her, like, to try to save her from bad things happening. So he feels somewhat responsible for her. And we know that he's well aware of how terrible Margaret Lennox can be. We've seen him interact with Margaret Lennox. We've seen her get the better of him. We've seen that his how he battles with her. And so I can see him kind of having a small freak out if he thinks that Lennox is targeting Philippa because of him. Again, it goes all back to, like, who suffers because of Lymond and how guilty does he feel because people suffer because of him. So if he thinks that Philippa, and of course it all goes back to Kristen Stewart too, like, Margaret Lennox has already killed a woman who was involved with him. So
True.
I can see him, having a genuine, I have to get back and save her mentality. But will he trust Philippa to take care of it on her own? Will he get stuck in Russia? Will the desire to protect someone who's dependent on him outweigh his desire to avoid England and Scotland? I don't know.
For Lymond to find out what Philippa is doing and what situation she's in, he would have to actually read her letters.
But not if he's getting information from someone. So, like, yeah, can he find out from Lynchpole? So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We shall see.
Other thoughts? Where are we going with all this?
I think, or at least I hope, things get more interesting. It's just these chapters.
Yeah, no.
Now that I'm past these, I'm sure it will be easier to focus on what's happening. So
I think the last part of this book is super, super interesting, just FYI. But, like, yeah, the first part is, like, my least favorite.
Yeah. I think there's been some super interesting dynamics set up here, though. Like, Philippa and Margaret Lennox I cannot wait to see how this plays out. This is going to be so interesting. Lymond and Gazelle and Ivan, very interesting. Like, how is he going to navigate all of this? Plus, with the emotional stuff, plus the men of St. Mary's, like, how is his relationship with them going to be damaged by his lack of emotional connection with them? Or are they going to, is their sort of military success going to carry the day? Are they going to be successful? I don't know. But I think there's some just super interesting dynamics here that it was a lot of setup, but I look forward to seeing it play out.
All right, any final thoughts to share? Well, thank you everyone for watching and commenting.
Yeah. Bye.